Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. There's a lot of things that we as human beings are good at, but the one thing that nobody ever says is that we're really good at stories. You can read a chapter of a book, and then another chapter of another book, and another chapter of another book, and you will never lose track of the stories. You can go back to them at any point. You know you can do this because you can watch TV. You can watch a soap opera, for example, 10 of them.
Exactly.
And you'll keep it up with all 10 of them. Mm-hmm. Not me. I don't like soap operas. But in reading, you can do that. All right, so this is a fun book, and I don't know if this applies to what I just said. but what I just said applies to it, because I think when you have a writer who can write a story that will hold your attention, and then you can put it down and come back to the book, even if it's a complete story, you're still coming back to it, right?
Yes.
We are fascinated by stories. It's part of being a human being. Poor Will's Almanack sounds familiar, right? Like Poor Richard's Almanack?
Yeah, but this one is funner.
This is written by Will. William Felker is on the phone. He is a nature journalist and columnist. He reads segments of his almanac on NPR. Oh, that is cool. So he's familiar with radio then, huh?
Yeah, it's very fun.
The book is fun. It's called Poor Will's Almanac for 2020, containing new names for the monthly moons, weather trends, notes on the progress of the sun. Yeah, I've been wondering how it's doing. The position of the major planets, dates of meteor showers and eclipses, and a calendar of holidays for farmers and gardeners. Mm-hmm. How fun is this? William Felker. Good morning, William. How you doing?
Good morning, Larry. I'm doing great. I'm up here in Goshen, Indiana, where the temperature is in the 50s today. It's almost like you guys down there.
Upper Indiana? Is that where that is?
It's Upper Indiana, yeah, and the whole Midwest is, of course, we're bracing for a storm.
That's what I heard, yeah.
But gee, right now, it's bad news for almanackers, because I always predict a Christmas cold front, which it usually arrives 3/4 of the years in my records, and this year I really lost it.
Oh, really?
On the other hand, the New Year's cold front seems to be moving in right on schedule, so this is all good.
That's true. But I always thought that part of any almanac is the riskiest part, and the more fun part is the stories or the little anecdotal things. That's always the most fun part.
Well, that's really true. When I first started writing almanacs back in 1984, I would ask my readers to send in stories, and I have so many wonderful stories from readers, and these are honest to goodness folks writing what I think are really good short stories. And in this particular collection, I've put together stories from 30 years of columns, and I think these are the best stories that I've ever collected, and they're all about outhouses, and there's something about that just hits your funny bone,
Yeah, there is.
I love it.
Now let me ask you something. Does the porta potty qualify as an outhouse?
It's the 21st century, Larry. It has to, really. I remember. Well, there's a porta potty story coming up right here. I was in charge of porta potties for an art show that we had a few years ago, and somebody had tipped it over during the night.
Oh no!
No! And I thought, gee, this is going to be so heavy, and then this very slight girl came up and said, "Oh, that's nothing." She picked it right up and put it right up. She made me feel like, well, I guess I better get with it. But no, the porta potty stories is perhaps the future, of this genre.
Let me ask you something. Don't you think it looks like it's an optical illusion when you look into the toilet of a fresh porta potty.
Porta potty.
So there's nothing nasty in there. It's just blue. It seems like it goes deeper than it actually does. It looks like there's actually a hole in the ground underneath it.
That sounds like it's a story waiting to happen. I think one of your listeners, is bound to come up with a good story about that. Well, when my nephews were kids, I used to tell them toilet monster stories about monsters that would appear from the toilet. Well, that's the same kind of thing.
So are these stories true in the book?
Yeah. These are all real stories from real people. Most of my columns run in the Midwest, and so these are stories from small town people. I mean, these there's no big city writers in this group, and they're all that's why they're so good. They're straightforward. This is what happened. It's fun.
Why do you spell Almanack with a K?
I guess because it's different, and
it looks cooler.
I think, well, that's the old-fashioned spelling. And so when I started this, I said, well, all the other almanacs are spelled just with a C. I'll add a K on mine, and it'll be more old-fashioned, and it'll be new.
Exactly.
So do you put one book out per year?
Yeah, I do. I've done an annual since 2003, with just a couple years, which I didn't get it done. But and they're usually quite different. They have different focuses, and like last year I did an almanac where I did an almanac horoscope.
Uh-huh.
And
was it right?
I got a terrible review on that one because somebody didn't like my grammar, but they didn't deal with the horoscope itself. So I figure I'm still off the hook on horoscoping.
Mm-hmm. So tell me one of the stories. Tell the listeners one of the stories that you want to share with us. The book is filled with these wonderful stories, and then I want to touch on the other things that were contributions by you yourself. So tell the listeners one of the stories that was sent to you that you like to share.
Well, one of my favorite stories is a Christmas story, in fact, and it deals with a teacher. I used to be a teacher, and so I kind of identify with this. But the teacher was always very strict with his students, and again, you can picture a one-room schoolhouse back in a previous century, and the students, it's not that they didn't like the person, but they chafed under this. And when Christmas rolled around, they were kind of expecting some kind of a treat from him. So anyway, when they didn't get a treat, they plotted to get revenge. And so when the teacher went to the outhouse, they tipped it over. And the door was facing the ground, right? So they trapped their teacher in the outhouse, and they didn't pull it up. They didn't help him out. So he stayed there all day. And then at the end of the school day, they pushed the outhouse up so he could get out, and then they all ran away. So the question is, what's going to happen, right? So
that's
the storyteller goes on, and the next day when the students came to class, they were fearful of what might happen, but in fact, on each of their desks was a box of candy. And the moral of the story is that after that, the teacher was always good to his students.
Oh my gosh!
One of the stories seems to have become a yearly tradition of remembrance. The Cherry Bomb Kid.
The Cherry Bomb Kid is just one of my favorite. That is one of the best outhouse stories of all time, and that is a story about a man who, well, when he was a boy, I think it was his mother and sister went into the outhouse, and they decided, well, let's play a trick on him. So they threw some cherry bombs into the back part of the outhouse.
Oh man!
I guess you picture the outhouse as just going down, but in fact there was in many outhouses a place where you could clean it out in back, which caused all kinds of events to happen. Anyway, they threw these cherry bombs in there and it just scared the dickens out of the mother and sister, and they ran off, and of course there was stuff flying around. And so the kids got in trouble, but the real kicker of the story is at that boy's birthday party at one point later on in life. They served him up a beautiful cake and so forth, but there was a cherry bomb inside, and they lit it. When he lit the candle, it blew up the cake in his face, right? So,
oh man! So I'm a little bit confused. These are outhouses or porta potties?
No, they're outhouses. They're wooden.
Where is this?
Yes.
I mean,
They're
think
from the early 1900s, right? The 1900s.
yeah.
Oh, these are old stories. These are not now.
Well, no, the stories are memory stories, really, of the writers.
Oh, okay.
And most of them did it. I mean, most of them were involved with outhouses as children.
Did you have an outhouse near you when you grew up?
I did not, and I'm pretty old.
Me too, and I didn't.
No, it's a vanishing tradition. Which is another reason, of course, why it's so cool to have them.
Well, the pushing over of an outhouse. Okay, a porta potty I get, but an outhouse, wasn't it just a house around a place where you sit? Like, wouldn't you still be sitting there? Like, you wouldn't fall over with it.
Yeah, you would. You would if you were in it.
How? It's you're over a hole. The hole doesn't get. You can't push a hole over.
No, you tip the outhouse over, and then when you put it back, it goes back over the hole. But they're loose, so to speak, so that you can move them when you want to freshen. You could cover up the old excrement area and just move the outhouse to a fresh area, dig a hole, and start over.
Yeah, because the seats are all attached, and some are one-holers and some are two-holers, from what I understand.
Right, yeah.
I would not like the two-holer one.
I don't know. I guess that's, first class.
I mean, you must be a nice guy, but if you were and I had to use it at the same time and there was a two-holer, I'd say, go ahead, I'll wait.
Yeah, that seems to be the I'd feel the same way, I got to tell you.
But even in a porta potty now, they have that little makeshift urinal thing.
Yeah.
And
it's true.
It's so loud when you use that thing. And I'm thinking everybody outside can hear this.
Well, it's true. I mean, that's progress, I guess.
And I always think, why do they have that in here? Is this so that we don't accidentally, go where the ladies go, and then they don't have this disgusting moment? So.
I know. No, the old outhouses were pretty, traditional that way. They had one or two holes, and it was a fixture. I'm thinking, probably up through the 40s.
So all these,
so
all the people who contributed, they're either old or they live in the mountains somewhere.
Well, no, I think they're old. I mean, and it's sad to say that some of my best writers are no longer with us. They were in their 90s when they submitted these stories, and that puts it back in 1920, 1930.
Well, a lost art is the simple art of reading a beautiful little story. Everything now has to be a classic and has to be, Harry Potter. It's got to be gigantic and it's got to be this amazing. The art of the short story is kind of lost right now. That's why I love this book.
You had a story from 1959 about the $5 bill. Yeah.
Okay, that's Mike Miller's story, I believe. Yeah. I'm forgetting that one.
Because he was sitting, he had newspapers and things. And then he had that $5 bill that he got, I guess, from his mom as a gift, and it was like unusual in 1959 to give the child a $5 bill.
Right, and it ended up, I remember he dropped it down the outhouse, down the hole, and he had to go fish it out. But he got it.
Yeah, he did.
That's why he went upside down into the depths and retrieved his $5 bill. Apparently there were lots of stories actually like that where people would drop their favorite hunting knife or their best shoes they were sitting on the other hole and then they'd fall in and so forth. So it was a dangerous place. We don't usually talk about that with modern plumbing.
Let me ask you something else.
That's great.
Today is December 26, 2019, and according to Poor Will's Almanack, today is the day of the pussy willow cracking moon.
Oh!
What is that?
It's
a pussy willow cracker.
Pussy willow cracking moon.
What is that?
Good morning.
I'm going to look tonight to see if I can tell.
Well, you see, I know you have these in Florida. They're pussy willows, right?
Yes.
Oh, the moon. We have the moon, yeah.
No, but we have pussy willows.
Do we?
Yeah, we do.
You have pussy willows, sure.
I didn't know.
Yeah, we do.
The thing about if you watch a pussy willow bush, some of them grow into big trees. But if you watch them in the wintertime, now down where you are, they're already cracking. But up north, as the pussy willow opens slowly with each thaw, spring gets closer. And so the pussy willow cracking moon, the first new moon of the new year, introduces the idea of hope for spring. And if you go out and look at the pussy willows every day, you'll see little by little, they start opening up. And then by March, they're all full and fat and fluffy. And
but if you
so,
didn't,
the
they're
visual
beautiful.
for spring.
Okay, but if you did, I'm trying to.
They're
If you didn't see it, you would still have hope. Spring is going to come.
That's right.
Spring's going to come.
Well, the thing is, I got stuck in this when I quit smoking back in the 80s.
What were you smoking?
I'll tell you a story. I quit smoking and I was going crazy. I can, go on about that. But what happened to me is I started walking in the woods and I started noticing all this stuff. And I started taking notes, and finally I had so many notes I didn't know what to do with them. And then the local newspaper said, well, yeah, you can do a column if you want, but if you do an almanac, you have to do it every week. And I've been doing that ever since 1984.
Oh, wow.
But what happened was I noticed all these things that I never noticed before, and one of them was pussy willows cracking.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
There's so many things that we miss, and that gets, I can go on about that, but it's, so when we talk about global warming or climate change or anything, if you don't notice what's going on to begin with, well, of course, you don't know what else is happening.
So here's the useful part of this. I mean, the stories are useful, obviously.
Oh, they're fabulous.
But I mean, the moon reaches apogee at 8:31 on January 1st.
p.m.
Right. That's its position farthest from the Earth.
Is there some way I use that information? Does that help me farm or something? I mean, what is the farmer? What do you use that for?
The best use that I have as an almanacker for the position of the moon is that when you have the opposite of apogee, when you have perigee, when the moon is closest to the Earth. And when you combine that with full moon, you're very, very likely to get extreme weather. Now, the New Year's front that's coming in, and it'll actually cool your temperatures quite a bit, is associated with new moon. And the new moon does affect tides. But then towards the middle of the month, we get full moon and we get perigee, and when those two things come together, we should have a wingdinger of a storm.
You have historical facts also. I mean, you talk about Lottie, and she was smoking in the outhouse, but back then, during her day, it was frowned upon for a woman to smoke. So she had died.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, there are a number of stories that I've received about, you know, women sneaking out to the outhouse and then they're caught, and, you know, people make a big deal out of it. But no, gosh. And now the pendulum has swung the other way, of course. I guess it's, you know, it was okay for women to smoke. Now it's not okay for anybody to smoke.
Yeah, but think about this. Talk about the pendulum. Like back then, the men and women used the same outhouse. There was no, this was the men's and that's the women's, right?
No.
And
that's
now,
right.
And now it's going back that way again.
Well, there's just no telling what's going to happen next, Larry. I mean...
So tell me, you know what I've always wondered? This is a serious question, but it's such a fun conversation that maybe it won't become serious. But I always wondered, like when farmers or sailors or any of the people in history that actually used the phases of the moon and all that to make decisions about what they planted or when they sailed and that kind of thing, I always got the moon part of it. But I never got the planet part of it. It feels like the planets are so far away, they wouldn't really have an effect on us. Or am I wrong about that?
No, I agree with you there. Or maybe I should say I don't know enough to talk about the planets. A lot of people believe that there is a planetary influence, and I don't see it. But the moon is clear because, you know, it affects tides, and the whole science of tides is the science of the lunar and solar gravitational pull and so forth, and that affects the weather too.
We had a NASA lady on one time, and she was telling us that the planets are so much bigger, most of them, so much bigger than Earth, that if you held a softball like 8 inches from your face, that's how big Uranus would look if it was as close as the moon. Isn't that amazing? So that would be a huge... It is,
and I think astrology gets a bad rap, you know, in the scientific world, because I think that there's a long tradition of that. I don't understand it, and I don't know it, but I respect these people who look at this stuff and see connections.
You've got a following.
We let our scientists make all the connections for us.
Right.
You know.
You've got a following, and I can tell from the phone ringing right now.
This
so I can't answer every call. All right, let me tell you, we have a copy of the book. I'll give it away after the break. If you just call me, I'll pick one at random. You can get the book on Amazon. Do you have a website?
I do have a website, but Amazon's the best place to get it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. What a fun conversation. That was really good. I can see why you're popular on NPR. Thank you, William Felker. Thank you so much.
Larry and Robin, thank you so much.
That was fun. All right, we'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Here is your 1-minute news brief. An Ocala woman was fatally shot by Marion County deputies yesterday when the woman pointed a gun at them as they were